This week's Beatitude is, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." It's like saying when you're worn down or something bad is happening to you, or maybe worse, maybe you're being oppressed or treated unjustly, it's saying that the kingdom of heaven is not closed off to you in those moments. In fact, Jesus is saying God loves the oppressed people of the world, and God can turn suffering into a doorway to enter the kingdom of heaven. As the Message paraphrase puts it, you're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there is more of God and his rule. Compare this to what some people say. If something bad is happening to you, God must be angry at you. Or if something bad is happening to you, you must have done something terrible. Jesus is saying, not at all. Blessed are the poor in spirit. That's the moment that you can be entering into God's kingdom. So the music that we're going to talk about that goes along with this beatitude is the blues. And this is a genre of music that emerged in the late 19th and early 20th century. And it has roots in the experience of enslaved people from Africa in the United States. And the kind of musical predecessors to the blues were things that slaves sang. So, for example, there's a thing called a field holler. Some slave owners did not allow their slaves to sing in the fields, and so the enslaved people found a way around this, and they would kind of sing, kind of talk to each other, kind of yell, and it became known as a field holler. The blues also has roots in spirituals, the music of the African American church. And the blues also has roots in work songs. And work songs might be used on a plantation or in a penitentiary to coordinate manual labor from the slaves or the incarcerated individuals. And it's rhythmic and has moments in the music of emphasis where the work would be done, whether that's work like swinging an axe or breaking stone or whatever the work might be done. The music coordinates with the labor that's being done. So the blues has its roots in those types of music and those types of experiences. So two main genres of blues emerged. One is called country blues, and that's blues where you usually have an individual singer accompanying themselves on guitar or perhaps banjo. This is people like Robert Johnson or Blind Lemon Jefferson, who sang about their hardships and their own experiences of suffering. And the blues was a way to express that. You also had a genre of blues emerge that's called city blues. And like the name implies, this is music that was more performed in urban areas. Often the country blues were performed by male vocalists. Often city blues were performed by female vocalists who were serving more as entertainers, perhaps, than singing about their own hardships for their own edification. And these two streams of blues are really important because they influenced jazz, and through jazz music, they influenced rhythm and blues, and they influenced then rock and roll, and basically all the pop music in America in the 20th century can trace some part of its lineage back to these genres of blues that emerged in the early 20th century. It's that influential. So we're going to take a listen to a specific song. This is a blues singer named Bessie Smith, and this song is called Backwater Blues. It's a song about hardship. It's a song about suffering. It's a song about her narrating the experience of an actual flood in Tennessee in 1926 and what that experience was like. Bessie Smith is a really significant blues singer. She's considered one of the best blues singers of all time. She was called the Empress of the Blues. And she didn't just sing about hardships like floods. She sang about other issues of social injustice at the time. She sang jailhouse blues about injustices and incarceration. She sang Send Me to the Electric Chair about capital punishment. She sang washwoman's blues about women's role in society at the time. And so the blues can not only address suffering, but these songs of hers were sometimes considered protest music. So musically, here's what to listen for. For timbre, listen to the sound of her voice, the tone color. What words would you use to describe it? She's got a great voice and it's unique. What makes it unique? How would you describe the sound of her voice? The harmony of the song has 3 basic chords. What's creating that harmony? The piano. There's a piano player that she's being accompanied by. This is actually the famous James P. Johnson, who's an important piano player in his own right. He's a famous stride style piano player accompanying Bessie Smith in this recording. For the rhythm, we have sort of a medium tempo. It's predictable, we can feel the pulse, and there's a nice lilt to it because at this time, the line between what is blues and what is jazz is not really clear. So if you feel like this sounds pretty jazzy with that kind of swing lilt to it, it's because it is a little bit jazzy. The melody is fairly simple. It uses blue notes, we call them, bluesy sounds melodically. It's simple and pretty repetitive and straightforward, but there's a lot of subtle nuance in how she uses her voice to express the melody, so pay attention to that. The form is what we call a blues form. It's a 12-bar blues, and it has become an incredibly important form for blues, for jazz, and for rock and roll as well. If you've ever listened to Ray Charles or Led Zeppelin or Elvis Presley or B.B. King, or really a lot of rock and roll from the 50s and 60s, it uses this form. That's how influential it is. And the texture is homophonic. We have her singing the melody and James P. Johnson accompanying her on the piano. She's in the foreground, he's in the background. Although he sneaks out a little bit and he'll put in these little melodic fills, we call them, at the end of her phrases. So listen for that too. So go ahead and pause your video now, go check out that song, and then come back and we'll talk a little bit more about the blues. So what's happening in terms of meaning in this music? In music, meaning behind a work of art usually comes from the text, if there's a text that goes along with it, or the context, or both. And with this piece of music, we have both. We have text, so the text is the experience of the flood and the hardship involved there. And the context is early 20th century America and the Black experience under Jim Crow, and what it means to be living in an area that can be flooded, and what it means to be living in poverty. So those two things, the text and the context, give meaning to this piece of music. And that's something you want to pay attention to in all the stuff we listen to. What's the text, if any? What's the context? Because the sounds don't always give us a lot of meaning. It's the context of when and how and by whom those sounds were created that gives music its meaning. So blues enables the performer to name their suffering, to give it a voice, to tell their story of what it means in that moment to be poor in spirit. But blues is also about celebration. It's kind of about turning the corner, about if you can name the suffering with beautiful music, then maybe there's the possibility that that suffering can someday be redeemed. So that's the parallel that I see between this Beatitude and this style of music. And then frankly, this genre has emerged. Sometimes pieces we hear that are a blues are just frankly celebratory music. So not every blues you ever hear is going to be 100% about suffering or hardship, but that's where the genre comes from. I'm going to end this and subsequent videos with some queries. And this is a Quaker term that I get from my own religious tradition. And they're questions that invite you to reflect on your own life and grow more deeply spiritually. So I have some queries here about the blues and this Beatitude. The first is, has music ever helped you deal with hardship in your life? Have you made music or listened to music or even engaged with some other art form as a way to minister to yourself when you're going through something difficult. My second query is, what would you write a blues about today? Maybe you should do it. Maybe you should write down some lyrics. That could help you process through something that you're dealing with. What would you write a blues about today? Or maybe it wouldn't just be a blues about you. Maybe it would be a blues about something that's going on in our community or in society. What would you lament about? What suffering would you name that's important to you? And then finally, have you ever empathized with someone who is going through something difficult? What did that look like? How would you empathize more deeply with someone in the future? How would you listen? How would you try and understand their story, having heard Bessie Smith's story? Okay, that's Beatitude number 1. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And a little bit of listening to the blues.